Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for the second round of Fiber Conversation series on Tafsir and Islamic Networks, which will be organized by Yuhanna Pink and I. And I'm really honored today to introduce our special guest and speaker, Dr. Irfan Nurtawa, also a good friend of mine since 2012. We've been working together on Tafsir projects, and I'm really honored. He's a senior lecturer of Quranic Studies at the State Institute of Islamic Studies, Metro Lampung, Indonesia, and research fellow at the Institute of Asian, African, and Middle Eastern Studies, Sofian University, Tokyo, Japan. He completed his bachelor and master degree in Islamic Studies at Universitas Islamic Negeri Sharif Hidayatullah, Jakarta, and PhD at Monash University of Australia in 2018. And his PhD thesis titled Jalalain Pedagogical Practice, Styles of Quran and Tafsir Learning in Contemporary Indonesia. Nurtawa did invest his time to work in the field of Islamic manuscripts and Islamic textual traditions in Southeast Asia, especially in the field of Quran and Tafsir manuscript and printed editions. Through his PhD research project, he expands his scope to study Islamic textual tradition and how the existence of Islamic texts, as represented by Tafsir al-Jalalain and different settings, reflect different understandings and manifestations of Islam in the Indonesian Islamic public sphere. His current publications include a recent article, which is one of the most important articles in recent years about Malay Quranic studies, is Quranic readings and Malay translations in 18th century Banten Quran's manuscripts, and the decline of traditional learning methods, as well as the Malay tafsir in the Sheikh Muhammad Said collection. And today, he's going to talk about the role of contestations in the Southeast Asian tafsir discourse, Tafsir al-Jalalain between traditional and modern networks. Please start your speech, Irfan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. Let me share the screen first. Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Majid, for your kind introduction. Today, I am very honored to be here talking about the reception of Tafsir al-Jalalain in different settings of Islamic pedagogies in contemporary Indonesia. In this great moment, I would like to thank Dr. Majid Indonesia, a good friend of mine, who kindly become the host and the discussion for my talk. And I should add Professor Joanna Ping for great initiative in organizing this meeting. Since last year, I have been actively involved in Freiburg conversations, and I found this event amazing and very useful that have enabled me myself learn from many of you, many of participants, and all the speakers, as well as the discussion. Through this presentation, mainly based on my PhD research project, as Majid already mentioned, I attempt a new approach to the study of Quranic interpretation, considering the ways in which works on Quranic interpretation are given meaning through practical pedagogies, and that the meanings of that pedagogy for Islamic social life are more broadly than textual ones. I try to
just a space, click on a space.
Okay. The empirical focus of this research is the use of Jalalain in pedagogy. In its original project, I observed Jalalain learning in three different settings in different contexts: traditional, modern, and in the kitab reading competition stage. However, in this presentation, I would like to just focus on the use of Tafsir Al-Jalal in two settings, traditional Majelis Taklim and modern classroom. The observation of these performances of the Jalal pedagogy for the basis of the research have been conducted in 2015 and 2016 in two pesantrens that offer different styles in learning. Traditional, as represented by Pesantren As-Salafiyah in the district of Sukabumi, and modern, represented by Pesantren Persatuan Islam in the district of Garut. So both pesantrens or Islamic educational institutions are located in the West Java province of Indonesia. So in this great moment, I would like to thank all the participants of my research, teachers and students of two Islamic boarding schools of pesantren in Sukabumi district, especially Mama Ajengan Maki as the founder and the leader of Pesantren As-Salafiyah, as well as in Garut district, Ustadz Aceng Zakaria as the founder and the leader of Pesantren Persatuan Islam in the Ranca Bango village. Without them, this research cannot be completed. So for this consent, help, and support, I am very, very much grateful. Pesantren As-Salafiyah in Sukabumi is managed by a Sundanese respected teacher, I said Mama Ajengan Maki, who is known in the region for his advocacy of traditional Islamic learning. In this pesantren, two performances have been observed, one by Mama Ajengan Maki himself that occupied the peak of the social hierarchy in the traditional teaching environment, and the rest by a senior student who replaced Mama's position because at the time Mama was in the unhealthy condition. The modern pesantren I observe belongs to the reformist modernist Muslim organization, the Persatuan Islam organization. When I was conducting this observation in the late 2015, the founder and the leader of this pesantren was elected as the general chairman of Persatuan Islam. As we know, Persatuan Islam is the second largest representative of modernist organization in Indonesia after the Muhammadiyah organization. The Persatuan Islam organization was established a century ago in the early 1920s. Before being engaged in the study of tafsir pedagogical practice, I was a pure textual researcher. As part of my research collaboration, for example, in the last 2 decades, I have been involved in some projects of cataloging manuscript and printed kitabs. One of them being the catalog project of printed kitabs circulated in Southeast Asia that now become the part of the collection in Library of Sophia University in Tokyo. From my PhD program at Monash University under the supervision of Professor Julian Patrick Milley and Professor Peter Riedel, I took many benefits from socio-anthropological perspective in my attempts at understanding Islamic practices to become my second specialization. Before going further, I would like to give you a simple analogy. If we imagine that Tafsir Al-Jalalain as a food raw material, like flour, a white or brown powder to make a cake, the final food product from this powder would depend on long-established imagination or culinary tradition of its users. For example, in Middle East or in Persian, maybe in the Persian countries, people are more likely to use flour to make a delicious kebab. But American people would imagine of making a donut in their mind. Or Italian people are very famous for their culinary tradition in making pizza using the same food raw material. So the use of the same food raw material, which is found everywhere, in some ways conforms to the tradition and collective logics of people in certain environment. So just as we see the flour product, Tafsir Al-Jalalain is used everywhere. It's used to serve the study of Quran in the environments that hold different pedagogical values, especially in the Indonesian context. In this regard, I need to stress that the Jalalain text is the same, and in most cases, people, I mean teachers, students, utilize the same printed editions, but differences in the way the tafsir is treated in pedagogy reflects diversity of the ways in which meanings of the Quran appear in their own public sphere. What I mean as a public sphere here can be places or room or assembly halls where certain group of people are collectively situated to study or to follow lecture or preaching or to listen to the oral presentation of a teacher in majlis or classroom. So what is majlis taklim and what is classroom that I refer to in this presentation? The arrangement of furniture in a majlis taklim tell us many things about this hierarchy. For example, the majlis taklim sometimes include different chairs for different teachers who use the same majlis. As I observe in Pesantren As-Salafiyah, there is the rocking wooden decorative chair with table, which is exclusively used for mama, for the leader of the pesantren, for pedagogical purposes. Sorry, I was not able to show you other slide because I removed it. Another chair is the modified desk with a spot for a cross-legged seat. So this unique chair was usually used by the son of mama. The third chair is made of plastic and accompanies a simple wooden square table. So this common chair, which is usually used by ordinary teachers like senior students, is usually moved to the edge of the majlis when not in use. Another hierarchy can also be identified in the use of the pulpit, mimbar for pedagogy. If you see the slide in the top right, you will see the respective teacher giving the lessons. So this kind of pulpit was exclusively used by mama as the leader of the pesantren for the purpose of pedagogy. As far as I observed in during my fieldwork, no one brave enough to use this pulpit for pedagogical purposes. In the modern environment, individual students are required to obtain specific competencies prescribed in the school's curriculum. The institution determines targets that students need to achieve when taking a course unit that are later measured in a formal way through examinations. Management of roles at the schools like teachers, students, and staff is administered according to bureaucratic procedures. Its willingness to adapt from that system harmonize it with the definition of modern that I have implemented throughout this presentation as a tendency to reach out positively to emerging realities of contemporary society. I'm sure we are already familiar with this environment. Tafsir al-Jalalain has played a dominant role in the story of Islamic intellectual tradition in the Malay Indonesian world. Use of the Jalalain in this region can be traced back to 16th century Java. Although the question of why the Jalalain would be so well received in maritime Southeast Asia is beyond this presentation, it is possible that its brevity might have something to do with this. For example, Dodge, in his book Muslim Education in Medieval Times, points out that this tafsir provides a simple but complete interpretation, and that the authors preferred to provide a short explanation of each verse of the Quran. Perhaps this combination of completeness and brevity helped the work receive wide reception and flexibility throughout the Muslim world, especially in the Southeast Asian region, from its first appearance in the late 15th century up to the present times. The importance of this tafsir can be seen from its distribution that is not limited to one ideological current, but has included a wide variety of Islamic segments, ranging from the most moderate to the very militant Muslim organizations. The Jalalain has also had an influential role in the production of many Quran-related works in many languages across the archipelago and has been translated into Southeast Asian languages such as Malay, Javanese, Sundanese, and Madurese. Manuscript collection of some libraries and museums indicate that from the early 18th to late 19th centuries, the Jalalain became dominant among the primary references for the subject of Quranic interpretation. The great number of extant manuscripts of the Jalalain and its glosses or hasyiah dominate the collection of this genre in Indonesia, especially those kept in the National Library of Jakarta. The fact is that up until now, the role of Tafsir al-Jalalain is still important as a textbook to serve the study of Quranic interpretation in the Indonesian Islamic educational context. First of all, I would like to make a terminological clarification on the term traditional and modern I use here, where I don't put this concept as a I don't put this concept as a binary opposition. I conceptualize traditional and modern here as fields constructed based on long established values. I understand those values as binding everyone in it on the same perspective to consider things worthwhile or not. Consider someone should do or should not do, should speak or should not speak. In the slide, as you can see, I attached the formula of French philosophers, Pierre Bourdieu's formula on his theory of practice. But in this research, I don't intend to test the accuracy of his theory in the construction of religious knowledge. But I think the conception of the theory of practice developed by Bourdieu is useful to understand the creation of knowledge as a social process. I would like to recap some basic on the existence of values in both traditional and modern settings where the Jalalain reading is situated. In the field of traditional Jalalain pedagogy, the place for study is called, as I said, Majelis Ta'lim. Two pedagogical methods that relate specifically to traditional learning, Bandongan and Sorogan. In this place, the respective teacher that is locally known as the Kiai in Java and Mama in the Sundanese region become the authorized and authoritative transmitter of knowledge. The Bandongan, which literally means to listen to someone reading the Quran and attempt to replicate the reading, refers to pedagogical activity where students gather and listen to the kitab reading and teaching of a Kiai or Mama. It is worth noting here that an important element of this learning task is that the Arabic texts in kitab are generally not vocalized. It means that mastery of correct vocalization is a core element and sometimes even the most important element of kitab-based learning. In connection with the mastery of correct vocalization, completion of kitab reading with one teacher is among the main pedagogical values that students seek during their study in the traditional pesantren milieu. So, what is completion itself? Completion is a learning goal prevailing in traditional learning environment that require the students to start at the first section of the book and continue to the end. Here, completion has to be understood alongside another pedagogical value, which is the gaining of blessing or tabaruk. In the traditional learning, comprehension is one of the blessings received through the teacher. So, cooperation with teacher is an effort to benefit from this. In connection with this, cooperation with teacher is kind of evaluation in the sense that students in the traditional learning are not subjected to an examination of the reference of the kitab. There is no exam that tests comprehension, but attendance is form of satisfaction in this pedagogy. Now we move to the Jalalain pedagogy in classroom. One clear distinction of modern Islamic education from the traditional one is that Islamic education is objectified, where the school's orientation is to produce competency and skills that every student have the same rights and chance to acquire. Tafsir Al-Jalalain is currently on the curriculum of the pesantren of the pesantren Persatuan Islam, but minus the Bandungan pedagogical practice that I already presented in the traditional environment. As we know, Persatuan Islam organization is a reformist, modernist Muslim organization which were established in the early 1920s by Muslim scholars who received the reform thought from regular readings of journals like Al-Manar, Al-Imam, and Al-Munir. So my explanation about for this reception in this modern environment is twofold. First, the Jalalain formed part of the educational upbringing of many influential modernist scholars. In this sense, their understanding of the Quranic tafsir learning tradition is inseparable from this text. Second, their understanding of that tradition gives a particular place and status to the Jalalain. This specific text is iconic of that tradition and is difficult to be replaced by another. For Tafsir Jalalain has become a symbol of the general tradition of Islamic learning, of which modernist reformist institutions like Muhammadiyah and Persatuan Islam organizations are very, very respectful. Now we come to understand how meanings of the Quran were created in the practices of tafsir pedagogies in the settings under study. We start from the use of Tafsir Al-Jalalain in a traditional environment. We start from performance 1, which was delivered by Mama as the leader and the founder of the pesantren. I observe how in Mama's understanding of Islam, pedagogical practice was proper if it reproduced the example provided by the pious ancestor or Salaf as-Salih. As I observe, Mama asserted this understanding during his teaching in ways that created a dialogue of a conflictual nature with other understanding of proper Islam circulating in contemporary Indonesia. His pedagogical style entered into theological polemics that are happening in Indonesia right now. For example, between the Sunnite as the majority and the Wahhabi Salafi groups that have become popular since the early 1980s. The way Mama selects certain themes for differing levels of elaboration is very important data in understanding his support for maintaining the doctrine. Mama approaches Bandungan Jalalain as a medium for him to disseminate knowledge and wisdom that students need to retain and understand for their future lives. Through his enthusiasm for providing correct readings of the verse of the Quran, dealing from the theological perspective, he strives to preserve the doctrine of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jamaah. This involves him in making students aware of potential problems caused by Wahhabi and Shiite interpretation of the verses under study. Mama considered their products of interpretation as heretical, and therefore their product of interpretation are considered dangerous. Now we move to the performance 2, which was delivered by the replacement Kiai. I observe an unusual condition or situation that arose during my fieldwork when Mama was replaced in his regular teaching schedule by a senior student called Mang Asep, who normally took the role of pesantren coordinator. Being appointed as a replacement Kiai put pressure on him to find appropriate ways of conducting the gathering or the Bandungan. This unforeseen situation offered me some methodological possibilities. By observing Mang Asep's effort to fill in for his superior, I was able to better understand how social status affects pedagogical style in the Bandungan. Different status levels of people in the pesantren are reflected and expressed. For example, in the way they are evaluated by audience. For example, I found that students did not consider cooperation with the replacement of Kiai as having the same value as cooperation with Mama, the real respected teacher. Instead, they recognize him as just as a friend with whom jokes and insinuation were regular elements of everyday sociality. So during the gathering, the replacement Kiai was facing an unsupportive audience. The students were reacting to his talking with laughter. At some occasion, there is a person who made phone rings that attracted other students to react. Of course, the replacement Kiai was distracted by this kind of noise. So I observed that in the replacement Kiai's performance, there were two important characteristics in the way Mang Asep, as the replacement Kiai, delivered his Bandungan. First, he focused on what I call dictation with translation. It is part of the basic method of the Bandungan, in which contextualization of the Quran through the Jalalain text is the key focus. The striking aspect was his repetition of passages and translation, fully controlling his tempo and making a clear intonation in the recitation of each passage of text and related translation. The second characteristic was his use of chanting. So for Mang Asep, as a replacement Kiai, trying to secure participation from students with whom he had been in contact on daily basis as pesantren coordinator, not as a Kiai, the skill of chanting made his job of teaching easier. The core theme explored in this is the connection between status and performance style. It is in this aspect where I consider how these two performers are socially accepted in this particular environment. Mama sets up his Bandungan as an arena where a wise old man gives his students words of wisdom and transmits deep understanding of Islamic knowledge to his followers as the successors generation. On the other hand, the replacement Kiai's Bandungan was evaluated as a young man's performance. Thus, he was compelled to subject himself to audience evaluation based on his own exercise of skills and knowledge. So, from both performance, we see the nature of medieval tafsir like Tafsir al-Jalalain, as originally showing more function as explaining text of the Quran. I quoted from the publication of Professor Joanna Ping here. The nature of medieval tafsir like Tafsir al-Jalalain, as originally showing more function of explanation, change into the way this tafsir is utilized to guide audiences in response to contemporary challenges and social problems. Now we move to the observed performances conducted in the modern pesantren. Generally, as indicated by the statement of the leader of pesantren during the interview, the pesantren Persatuan Islam has treated Tafsir al-Jalalain as the manual for the students to practice their Arabic skills. Aside from it function as Tafsir al-Mufradat. In my observation of the Jalalain pedagogies in modern pesantren Persatuan Islam, I came across with two different styles of Jalalain pedagogies. The teaching styles of the two teachers show different strategies of learning. The first being delivered by I call teacher A, which is more formal and monologic, and the second by teacher B, being more informal and dialogic. I emphasize that teacher A and teacher B differently perform their tafsir elaboration. Teacher A's approach was to remain close to the literal text, and that is reflected in the word he used to describe his textual pedagogy, ngahuapan, literally meaning feeding the baby. So teacher B, on the other hand, seems to free himself to reflect on the text being studied and opened possibilities of other interpretation, not based on the textbook, which is the Tafsir Jalalain itself. I observed that these approaches contrast significantly, but are acceptable in the modernist, reformist, pesantren Persatuan Islam milieu. Differences in styles of the two teachers emerge clearly in the elaboration phase, specifically in the extent to which they remain within or move away from the literal textual meanings of the Jalalain text. My point is that the two teachers have different approaches to the Jalalain as source of authority. Teacher A was reluctant to lose sight of literal text in his elaboration, whereas teacher B was more open to a broader range of context. Teacher B reflected on the subject text to students based not only on the Jalalain, but also on his general knowledge and a wider range of symbolic possibilities. I came across with this when teacher B quoted Surah Al-Hijr verse 29. Teacher B explained to his students that humans were also given God's spirit as God breathed into him. Wanafaktu fihi min ruhi faqa'u lahu sajidin. It was when teacher B moved from the literal text of the Jalalain to figurative and symbolic excursions. He was exercising an interpretive strategy characteristic of Sufism. It is not surprising that the explicitly Sufi material was included in his pedagogical range. It is because teacher B is a graduate of Indonesian Islamic University, UIN or YIN, where Sufism discourse is very popular among the students in these universities. Teacher B here explained that humans, as represented by the perfect man, Al-Insan Al-Kamil, are mirrors in which God's attributes are reflected to the perfect man. He strongly advised students that such qualities of God's attributes should be implemented on a daily basis. It is important to note how far he has traveled from the literal text of the Jalalain. His elaboration was high in ethical and moral teaching of Islam, but was enabled rather than constrained by the literal meaning of the Jalalain text. Another example of teacher B's preference to enhance his elaboration of the subject text through his own illustrations. An example of this is his tafsir elaboration of verses 151 to 153 from Surah Ali Imran, which focuses on the Battle of Uhud. As you can see in the slide, teacher B made the illustration as shown in the slide to explain the chronology of the Battle of Uhud, especially narrated in the verse 153 of Surah Ali Imran. In his attempt to make his narrative element more understandable for students, it is very interesting that teacher B marked the unbeliever Meccans with a pirate flag, using the symbol as a recognizable sign of evil and immorality. Of course, my intention is not to discuss the flag in connection with the history of piracy here. The main point is how and why this flag was used on the board to identify a position of group in the Battle of Uhud as shown in the illustration in the slide. Teacher B utilized the board to help create a shared imagination among students on the battle narrated in the Quran and commented upon in the Jalalain, in the Tafsir Jalalain. So, in presenting his illustration on the board, teacher B identified the position of Meccan troops with the traditional Jolly Roger flag of piracy, with the skull and crossbones symbol picture in the uncolored triangle-shaped flag. You can see the flag in the slide. Of course, presentation of this flag is absent from the Jalalain text, nor does the flag come from the Prophet 7th century Arabia. Rather, the meaning of this flag is socially interpreted by participants in this environment to symbolize wrongdoing. To sum up, Pesantren Persatuan Islam as representing modern education opens its educational offering to a wide variety of pedagogical approaches to the Quran. The institution hires qualified teachers who bring their own orientation and pedagogical styles. As presented, I encountered two models, teacher A and teacher B, that are both acceptable to the Persis educational milieu. One supporting a strict textual orientation, and the other opening the Quran and the Tafsir textbook to a wide variety of techniques and methods of interpretation. In this regard, the modernist reformist Pesantren Persatuan Islam seems to be a porous educational environment in which these two different orientations are acceptable in the study of tafsir. I would like to present the possible contribution on my research to the field of knowledge by telling you a story. My friend told me about some kitabs, including Tafsir Ibn Kathir, that are found in the foreign fighters camp in the southern Philippines. As found in the newspaper, people commonly look at and judge those books as the determinant factor why those people become radicalized or extremists. Based on this presentation, I think it is not merely about the book that people learn, but it's also about the way people learn and then produce types of referential comprehension during their learning process as part of creating a religious ideology. So Tafsir Jalalain is like the flour food product. So learning from the flour for making a cake I mentioned at the beginning, looking at tafsir as a social practice is important in the sense that the social construction of religious knowledge as represented in the tafsir learning is a product of contestations between the utilized text, the conducted pedagogical practices run by the holders of religious authorities, social relationship between any individuals, and between groups of people, and the established structures and values in specific fields of actions. I think that's about all. Any feedback from you, Majid, and all of the participants is very important in the way this kind of research can continue in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can you exit the share screen? Yeah, thank you very much, Irfan, for this fascinating talk. So I share my remarks, and after that you have time to give us some more feedback and comments, and then we stop recording, and then we have question and answer. Okay, thank you very much. I think it was very interesting and gave me, and I'm sure to our audience, new information on what is going on in Muslim Islamic boarding schools, and about the back and forth between classical teachings and modern schools of thought and educational systems, and the way they may enrich or marginalize each other, and the way Islamic boarding schools can give a new voice to classical works. Actually, while you're presenting, it came to my attention that what you presented may indirectly invite us to re-examine recent claims, whether Islamic classics were rediscovered beyond the borders of the Arab world and Persia. And moreover, to what extent a large number of lay and professional scholars who had no idea about printing industry had contributed in reviving automatically or systematically contributed in reviving Islamic tafsiri stuff from a long time ago. Your argument raise a serious question in my mind about the way one may or want to define the notions of classics. This is a recent debate came out of the book of Ahmed al-Shamsi and other scholars are contributing to this area, like Walid as well. So they invited us to rethink about the notion of classics and Islamic classics and how geographical borders may have changed our understanding of Islamic tradition. As such, my first question is, what do you think of other commentaries which may have potential to compete with Tafsir al-Jalalain in Indonesian Islamic boarding schools and their boarding context? And there are other commentaries already popular in that region, right? At least we know that there are other short and concise commentaries in that context. So I wonder if you think or you see any other possibilities for commentaries can join the Jalalain commentary in boarding schools. So I continue and then you have time to answer. Once one visit, for example, whenever I visit the Leiden University Library, to rediscover Malay Indonesian manuscripts, I can simply come across a large number of copies of Jalalain manuscripts. Some of them even produced at the turn of the 20th century, but as manuscripts. And the thing which is interesting is that they never printed. And the thing which is very interesting, they are replete with first-hand glosses, hawashi, and they are not similar to some famous classical glosses or super commentaries, or they include marginal points and minor interlinear commentaries. And to me, these are a form of innovation, making some distance from the past, that they are still writing commentaries in Hawashi or glosses on Tafsir Jalalain and other commentaries on the Quran are is popular in the Malay Indonesian context. So I see that as a sort of innovation. They try to do something which is sometimes different from those of classical traditional figures. So I wonder if you came across during your project and your research, if you came across these innovations and novelties in your research, and if still people write commentaries in Jalalain for the sake of pedagogical discussions or debates. What you already shared, what you've shown is a good example of that. But the drawings and paintings and even the teachers teaching the way students answer to questions or describe a verse of the Quran. But what about systematic and systemic innovations in writing sharh or commentaries in Jalalain? And what are the main sources, for example, you said about the way the students' works or writings about verses are checked by teachers. So I wonder, what are the main sources by which they are translated or checked, how they check the accuracy of their translations? So that was my second question. The next point is about what I'm really interested in is the relationship between piety and self-purification, tazkiyah, tasawwuf, wa tajdeed, reviving the sunnah. Your emphasis on majalis, and that are centered in mosque. So I went through your thesis, I really like that. You said there are centered in mosque, a building with 3 spaces, and every particular space, a particular group of students are engaged with reading the text. So this reminds me of a picture, which is to my knowledge, really global in history of Islam, that gathering in religious schools and chambers were dealing with 3 main elements of learning ulum ad-din, reviving the sunnah, and becoming pious. So all of them simultaneously and automatically move along each other. So in your amazing thesis, you have also clarified that traditional pesantren is generally under control of a specific king group, and this control may extend for generations. In such an educational environment, teachers are not formally appointed, so it's on page 90. So I wonder how much such pedagogical context may be flexible and welcoming of other Islamic exegetical works, those which used to have further influence on Muslims' tasawwuf history and education. You partly mentioned the notions of chanting, which is very popular in maktab or in center, and where students recite the Quran to go along with their teacher, and then they start to repeat it, and again chanting what the teacher says. So, but I think part of these notion of chanting and reciting Tafsir al-Jalalain comes back to the notions of to some mystical traditions. So this is what I'm asking: to what extent these educational contexts, which are more or less controlled by a group of seniors and or professional Muslim scholars, to what extent they are flexible, welcoming other types of materials and sources. Also, I think your point on true Salaf generation and the reception of Jalalain make a lot of sense too when one goes beyond Malaya, beyond Nusantara. For example, moving to Afghanistan or Iran, I think that also makes sense, a lot of sense. For example, the Sunni communities of Iran, as far as I examine or research, the Sunni communities of Iran, they have paid much more attention to Tafsir Jalalain, as well as that of Tafsir, Zamakhshari al-Kashaf, Kashaf al-Zamakhshari, and in contrast to other Sunni classical works. And, or as I already attended a talk a few years ago by Andreas Stewart in Frankfurt. He conducted some research in Afghanistan, in Afghan educational context, and he also realized he gets more or less similar, findings like that of yours that led to understanding that. So yeah, this is Tafsir al-Jalalain, which is still contributed to Afghan Islamic educational contexts, either in universities or boarding schools. So what I'm asking is, what you think? Do you see any relationship between these things? There's such sort of commonalities, pedagogical uses, because you said about whether you compared about, that the same material can be treated differently in different contexts. But what I mean is that, for example, in Afghan, if you go to Shi'i societies, if you go to the Ahmadi societies, if you go to non-Sunni centric societies, whether we can see or we can observe the importance of Jalalain, the contribution of Jalalain or not. And I'm asking particularly that the notions of Salaf might differently be translated if you go to Iran or Afghanistan or even different parts of the Malay Indonesian world. You go to Malacca or you go to Kelantan or you go to, let's say, some part of Kuala Lumpur. So the way they translate the notions of Salaf is very much, I think, different with the places that you visited. So yeah, I wanted to know about your idea about the connection between the way people apply in Afghanistan and Iran, different regions, and those people in Indonesia. So is there any relationship, what you think of it generally? And the last point, which I think can be another point which can be flourished through your project, is about the way social media may play a role in circulation of Islamic boarding schools and instructions and the outcomes. I think this is important because social media and public media, social public media used to actively contribute to raising new voices in Indonesia. So these topics have already been raised by Joanna Pink and her students about the contribution of social media and tafsir. So I was wondering to what extent social media can help, or is used by Islamic boarding schools to share their ideas, to learn something, share with the students, and vice versa. They share their whatever they are doing in their school with the general public. So these are my comments, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Majid Daneshkar. Thank you very much for your comment and feedback. It means a lot for the continuation of the research in the future by myself or by other researchers who are interested in the same research area. I realized that there is very little study about the reception of a tafsir, like Tafsir al-Jalalain in current context, and how this work was situated or to a certain extent was commodified to strengthen the constructed ideology, or at least to transmit knowledge that is in integer opinions as the performer of kitab reading suitable and useful for the students to know, although the created meanings of the Quran as the result of the interpretation are far beyond the textbook, like the Tafsir al-Jalalain. I would like to start from your first question. This is about the what about other commentaries. In this regard, I would also like to note an anomaly actually on the position of Tafsir al-Jalalain in the contemporary tafsir traditions. In the case of modern or contemporary Southeast Asia, the role of Tafsir al-Jalalain as the main or single reference of the for the composition of Quranic exegesis or translation has been contested with the increasing with the increasing need of modern Muslims to take the Quran as a guidance for their daily lives since the early 20th century. So yeah, I must be thankful to Professor Johanna Pink's publication about the how to say the changing nature of the tafsir exegesis tafsir tradition from its first function as explanation to become the guidance here. As a result, the nature of medieval Quranic exegesis like Tafsir al-Jalalain that more show the function of explanation rather than the function of guidance seems to be difficult to accommodate the need of Muslims in the modern age to understand the Quran more instantly. Nevertheless, the fact is that Tafsir al-Jalalain and its translated version are still found everywhere. So this is the fact that we cannot escape. And it is proven that in many parts of the Muslim world, the role of this tafsir is indispensable. For example, we have at least two English versions translated by Professor Feras Hamza and also Professor Aisha Beldi. So with this phenomenon, it is important to dig up the motives of the users of this book in current times, as well as the motives of the publisher in printing this work and how they deal with the demand, and the motive of any groups who keep using this tafsir to serve the study of the Quran. Aside from that, I should mention my highlight important talk last week about the publication of Tafsir al-Muyassar that mainly contains Salafi paradigm and its impact on the Quranic translation in many languages. So I think if Majid already mentioned about what about the other tafsir, I think Tafsir al-Muyassar would be would be the promising competitor for the Tafsir al-Jalalain in the development of the future Quranic exegesis tradition in Indonesia, especially because I'm talking about this tradition in the Indonesian context. So, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't see that this tafsir started to influence the production of current Quranic translation in the current Indonesian context. But I'm sure that it is just a matter of time that very soon this work, I mean Tafsir al-Muyassar, would enrich the treasure of Quranic tafsir and translation in this region. Another talk that I should mention is the one delivered by Professor Johanna Pink last year on the existence of Salafi paradigm in the current printed edition of Tafsir Ibnu Katsir. I found that this is also the case with Tafsir al-Jalalain, where its modified version come out under the title Tahzib Tafsir al-Jalalain. In this regard, I think it is important to understand how this edited or modified Jalalain is used in certain groups to serve their need to understand in their sight the true meanings of the Quran. Again, there is still a little study about this and that more research need to be done in the future. Now I try to answer your first or five questions. I think your four question about the Salafism or Salafiyah. In the Indonesian context, I think this term is interchangeably used by many groups of the Indonesian Muslim. This is kind of the contested term. Everyone wants to be connected with the Salafi, whatever the meaning is. So, for example, Mama named his pesantren as Salafiyah. Mama chose the word Salafiyah based on the word Salafa. Salafa means those who have predeceased, found in the Jauhar at-Tauhid, authored by Ibrahim al-Laqani. Fakullu khairin fittiba'i man salafa, wa kullu syarrin fi ibtida'i man khalafa. Thus, every virtue is the following of those who have preceded, and every unwise thing is the innovation of those who come later. So, a commentary of this theological work of Al-Laqani was authored by Ibrahim bin Muhammad al-Bajuri, entitled Tuhfatul Murid. Al-Bajuri provides commentary of this poem as follows. I have notes here. Every created virtue was the result of following the example of the pious predecessors, man salafa, of the prophet, his companions, the companion followers, tabi'in, those who follow the companions, followers, tabi'in, and the next generation, notably the men for mujtahid that hold consensus or ijma and restrain Muslims from quitting the community or jama'ah through the issuing legal opinions or ifta and developing Islamic jurisprudence. It means that those who are eligible to be a Salaf people, they are the followers of Madhab, based on the commentary provided by the Al-Bajuri, in his book Tuhfatul Murid. But yeah, if we know, there is also a term of Salafism that we know globally, which is which is the perspective firstly developed or pioneered by the Jamaluddin Al-Afghani. So in this regard, this kind of terms in Indonesian context has been contested. So everyone wants to be, every group need to be affiliated with the so-called Salafism. So this is the second number two. The question number two. The question number two. Another question is about the glosses with the interlinear translation, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, of course. Based on my experience of observing or investigating some manuscript of Jalalain, especially those kept in the National Library of Jakarta, there are many glosses of the Jalalain that were translated into local languages like Javanese language. So they are kind of the interlinear translation, just like we found in the Banten Qurans, A51 and W277. But I think more research needs to be done about the way this kind of translated version have more accuracy of what the Jalalain text says. So yeah, I think it should be more research about that. Regarding the social media, the role of social media in disseminating propaganda among the Muslim group, especially in the pesantren environment. Yeah, I benefit from publication by Joanna Pink. This about the sorry, I forgot the title. Quran interpretation in in today. Forgot the title. Sorry, but yeah, I think what John thinks about that is very important, and surely I don't. I'm not able to say more about the role of social media in disseminating propaganda because, as you know, pesantren has has a very strict rule in the way that students are not allowed to bring any handphone or any electronic device that enable them to access any internet. Things from the internet. I think that's all, Majid, and I think thank you very much again for your valuable feedback.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. So let's just stop here and then we move to question and answer.